The government should now have a full picture of the state of housing in New Zealand. Yesterday, it released the Housing Stocktake report, which claims there are more homeless people than the stats suggest and that many people are missing out on emergency housing. Lots of people had things to say about it. One of them is Ashley Church, the Property Institute of New Zealand Chief Executive. He is with us now. Good morning, Ashley.
G'day, Haley.
So this can only be a good thing, right? We need to get the data before we can start fixing it.
Oh, look, when Phil Twyford announced he was going to do this back in November, I would have agreed with that. It was an opportunity for a clean slate to basically do a stock take of the housing estate in New Zealand, to look at the various different aspects, first-home buyers, the housing market, what was happening with immigration, etc., and to come up with a report which basically told us where we were at, what had worked and what hadn't worked previously, and how that was going to fit in potentially with what the government was proposing to do going forward. Sadly, that's not what we've ended up with. What we've basically got is a partisan party political manifesto, which essentially paints the picture of paints a picture which is much more extreme in some respects than the situation actually is, and essentially acts as a justification of the government's policies going forward. And that's unfortunate because it's a big missed opportunity.
What parts about it do you think that you dispute, that you think are more extreme than the reality? Because, I don't know, just from the sense of it out there, it does feel like there is a massive crisis.
Well, let me give you a good example. I mean, there's several examples of this, but just in respect of time, let's look, for example, at the issues around homelessness. So there is an issue with homelessness, Haley. There's no question of that, and we've got some problems that we need to resolve as a nation. The problem is that this takes that and it amplifies it by about tenfold. And so the definition that they use, and I'll read it to you because it's actually really important.
Cool.
It defines homelessness as people without safe and secure housing, including in temporary housing, sharing with another household, or living in uninhabitable places. Now, let me give you a really good example of how ridiculous that is as a definition. I've got a niece, for example, who's living in Hawke's Bay with her boyfriend with my sister, her mum. And the reason that they're doing that is because they've moved in with their mother so that they can save some money for a house, and at some stage over the next few months they'll buy a house and they'll move on. Under this definition, Haley, they're homeless. I mean, that's just nonsense. And so there are thousands of people in those circumstances, and what it does is it actually makes a mockery of something that's really important. And I mean, I could point to dozens of other examples in this report that do the same thing.
I feel like that's a little bit sort of cherry-picking a story, an example, when in this report it does say that 9 out of 10 homeless people who go to a community shelter agency are turned away. And so probably it's actually the data is actually underreported. Oh,
look, I'd go the other way, Haley. I'd say that that's exactly what you would expect of social service providers. The organisations like the Salvation Army, etc., who are providing an amazing and important service at the front end of this, at the sharp end, those are the people to whom people actually do go. And you would expect that if there was going to be an emphasis on what's happening in that space, it would be with those people. So it doesn't surprise me to hear them say that there are issues in that regard. But you can't extrapolate that across the entire sector and say that it's a problem of the magnitude, of the amplitude that it's actually being proposed that it is here. So I would argue that yes, there is a problem at the sharp end. Let's focus on the sharp end. Let's solve that problem. But let's not make it so big an issue that it overwhelms pretty much everything else that's happening in the property space. Because there are some serious problems in the rental space. There are some problems with first home buying. And we need to treat all of those things equally. And we need to have integrated policy that deals with all of those things. The other thing that I would say, Haley, is that the problem with homelessness is a direct symptom of not building enough property. So if you don't have enough houses, what tends to happen is people who can afford accommodation tend to be the ones who move into it. So the people who are left out are the people at the bottom. The solution to that is to build more houses as quickly as possible. And that means involving the state, which Phil Twyford's doing with Kiwi Build, but it also means doing things that involve the private sector, and that's where this plan falls short.
So one of the authors of the report, Shamabel Equab, has said that he doesn't think Kiwi Build does enough. He wants to see 500,000 houses a year. Yeah. I mean, is this possible?
Well, no. and it's a nonsensical figure, 500,000. All that does basically is make people turn off. What we need to do is focus on the government doing as much as it possibly can, and Phil Twyford's trying to do that, but then get the private sector involved. And the way that you do that is you put incentives in place to get the private sector building houses as quickly as possible, which is the opposite to what's currently happening, which is policies which are around essentially actually trying to scare people out of the market. So there's a whole range of stuff that needs to be fixed at the moment. It's basically going begging, and instead we end up with this document that's essentially trying to justify a policy which in large part's not actually going to work.
There are some very very good things about this document, and it's highlighting that the rental laws around the rentals need to be changed or looked at.
Yeah, again, don't agree. So, for example, it claims 3 things for rentals. It says Kiwi Build's going to help rentals. I agree with that, but it also says things like healthy homes are going to help the rental market and produce more accommodation. Now, healthy homes is actually a good idea. The healthy homes bill is actually a good thing, and most landlords would agree with that, but it is not going to help the rental market. It's actually another one of those complicating factors that's actually going to scare landlords out of the market. So there's some pretty ambitious claims that are made that simply don't stack up in respect of the logic.
Well, sometimes we have to do the hard things to get the right
agreed.
Outcome, right? Thank you
absolutely.
so much for your time this morning.
Always welcome.